Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Angela. Lovely to see you.
Oh, great to see you again. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all very good. Life here in Portugal is good. I live on the Algarve, and yeah, it's a lovely place to live with my family. And yeah, I always wanted to live in a place where people go on holiday, and I'm lucky enough to do that these days. So yeah, all good. Yeah.
So, just anyone who's watching this, I'm so honoured and privileged to have Glenn Harrold here today. If you don't know Glenn, he is one of the world's most successful hypnotherapists and best-selling author as well. Glenn, you've helped thousands of people across the globe, including many celebrities, and you've sold over 10 million
Mm.
hypnosis CDs, MP3 downloads, and apps. That's amazing. And I'm testament to your work because I actually discovered your work I think it was 2015 or 2000, yeah, around 2015, 2016. I started listening to your recordings,
Mm.
and I can say that they really changed the trajectory of my life in a very positive way. And I really noticed my life changing very, very dramatically after that. And
Mm.
my habits changed, my thought patterns changed. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for sharing that. It's nice to hear that because, when I started making recordings, it was always my intention to create recordings that had something in them that were transformative. I knew selling them, if they were going to be mass consumed, then they had to be, safe first and foremost because they were
Yeah,
hypnosis recordings, but also very effective. So that was my aim. And so I kind of, with the recordings, I'd set them up like I did my therapy sessions. So they'd be like in 5 stages. So I'd have an introduction, an induction, a deepening process, then the post-hypnotic suggestions and the affirmations. And it
yes.
was really, so I thought about it a lot, and I used music with that had certain frequencies and certain tones in them to complement the recording. There was a lot of thought, and
Yeah.
it kind of paid off in time, because people like them and still do. So
Well,
feel very lucky.
they can change your life. I've got your ultimate hypnosis app, and rather than
Yeah,
just like scrolling on my phone at night time, now I put on one of these. So I love
fantastic.
my two favorites are the Overcoming Bereavement. I think I told you the story about my dad coming through in that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the Astral
amazing.
Traveling one as well. They're my two favorites.
Yeah, it's nice to hear that because the astral
Yeah.
travel is new.
Oh,
I've
I
only just
love that
heard of that,
one.
and
Yeah.
it's kind of quite a big journey. I think that recording, it's nice if you understand the concept of astral travel, and
Yeah.
you can go on that journey, and you know that you get a lot more from it that way.
Yeah, if
So
you're
it's
spiritually
brilliant.
minded as well, it's a very safe and natural way to kind of to cross dimensions.
Yeah,
If you're that way minded, and I think going into real deep meditation, it is possible to do that. So I've experienced
yeah,
it myself and out of body experiences. So yeah,
yeah. You said about that. Yeah,
yeah,
amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
no, just saying with that recording. Yeah, it's one that I'd been asked to make for a long time, and and I was careful the way I scripted because you said the word safe there, and I want it to be a real safe experience when people astral
yeah.
travel with it. So I built a lot of that into the recording.
Yeah, yeah, it's wonderful. It's yeah, I highly recommend it. I love all of your hypnosis recordings and meditations, but I think at the moment I kind of alternate, but at the moment it's definitely the astral travel one and overcoming bereavement. But it's whatever you're going through at the moment, that will
Yeah, yeah,
change throughout your life depending on what you need at the time. So
yeah. That's a good point because in the app I've got, over the last 20 years I've made recordings that cover so many different things. I've got 140 titles in there now,
yeah,
from deep sleep to weight loss to
yeah,
astral traveling to the
yeah.
solfeggio tones. So
Yes, is that
it's
the
nice that people,
Hertz? Is that the Hertz one? The five
yeah, the frequencies.
frequencies? Yeah.
So the solfeggio tones were sacred tones that Gregorian monks used to chant to invoke certain states.
Yes.
And so I made a range of recordings based on each one of those frequencies.
Yeah.
And I used an amazing musician called Ali Calderwood to create the actual tones, because that was kind of his specialist area, and he did an amazing job with that. The music in it is just otherworldly. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I've
And
listened to those ones. They're awesome because it really does it does higher your, I don't know if that's the right word.
raise your consciousness.
Raise your, thank you. Raise your
Yeah.
consciousness and raise your frequency and vibration at
Yeah,
the same
it
time.
really can, and I think, that's an important thing. It's probably the most important thing we can do in this day and age, to raise our vibrational energy and,
Yes.
um, you know, live a life outside of, the matrix, if you like. That's everyone's a lot,
Density. Yeah, the
the
system, the
density,
matrix. Yeah.
the low vibrational density. When you work on your inner self and your inner state, you raise your vibration and you rise above that. And a
Yeah.
lot of that fear and negativity bypasses you. You
Yeah.
don't feel it. You live a different life in the same world as other people who are struggling and in fear.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
I think you're testament to that as well. And we'll talk about your story in a moment because obviously you've had 20-year career, huge successes, but it wasn't
Mm,
always like that. And you,
mm,
when we've spoken before, you grew up with very adverse,
mm,
difficult environment,
mm,
incredibly harrowing. The stories that
mm,
you've, I'll let you talk in a minute, but um you've been testament to actually overcome them with hypnosis, law of attraction, and meditation. I think
mm.
it's testament to anybody else going through situations
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
It was one of those sort of classic situations where, at one point life was so bleak and grim, and I was struggling so much, and I was never at the point where I wanted to check out. It never got to that. I always had a part of me wanted to live and experience a more abundant life. I just didn't know how to experience it. I was living in a tower block in Penge, and I remember, like, they used to set the bins on fire. These kids would set the bins on fire every night, and I was literally at the top floor of this tower block in a rough area of
Gosh.
South London, and driving an old banger. I used to do. I was mini cabbing around the West End at night, and that was my living. And I always knew there had to be something more to that. And when I got into the law of attraction later on, and that, I'd be living in that place in those grim circumstances, but I'd be projecting out this abundance and this prosperity and this new life that I wanted to create,
Yeah.
even though my actual circumstances were bleak.
Yeah.
So that was
And
the way out.
you had a really difficult childhood, didn't you? If you don't mind talking about it with
Yeah.
if you
Yeah. I mean,
talk a bit
I
more about
grew
it.
up in a very, very dysfunctional, violent household. Um, and I'd run away from home from the age of 12. I used to sleep rough, and not all the time, but I'd have spells, and but sleeping rough in the middle of winter in England, in the south of England, it was pretty grim, and
Brutal.
it was brutal. Yeah. And booze became my sanctuary. I started drinking heavily from like the age of 13, and by the time I got to 17, my liver just completely gave out. I woke up one day, I had yellow skin, and it was like a massive wake up call. I had to change my life, and so it was very grim. But I always had something in me that knew there had to be more to life. There had to be something better, and that eventually led me onto the self-help healing path. Because I think
Yeah.
when you face adversity and struggle, a lot of people who go into therapy, become therapists, come from that sort of background, because they want
Yeah.
to fix them. They need to fix themselves and their own wounds and traumas. And that was certainly my case.
And it wasn't always like this, was it? If we go right back to, I don't know if it's when you're in the band or before you're in the band, that
Yeah.
life was very different for you. So do you want to, should we go back and
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about how it was?
I grew up in a very unconscious household, and it was very chaotic, very violent. And my parents were just constantly at war. And, and I was the oldest of three brothers. And, I kind of, when I got to a teenager, I started to rebel against I was also in a school that I hated. I didn't like the school I was in. It was an all boys
Yeah.
school, very, very strict. I used to get the cane all the time. And it was
No.
quite, yeah. It was like, I remember once I was, I don't know, 13. I got the cane for having flares that were too wide. This
Oh
was
my
in the
gosh.
70s, 1970s. I mean, David Bowie was wearing these cool flares, and I had to have a pair. And I got the cane actually hit for wearing them. So I kind of had a lot to rebel against, and I did. I often ran away from home. I slept on the streets many, many times from the age of 12. I ran with a bad crowd. I got into drugs and boozing very heavily, and
Yeah.
eventually I got my liver packed up. I woke up one day when I was 16, 17, and I turned yellow. My body just couldn't handle it. I'd abused myself so much. And I was a really lost soul. I failed at school. My home life was horrible. I was in and out of courtrooms and all that kind of stuff. And my mates were a product of their environment. I gravitated towards other kids that were, very came from dysfunctional backgrounds and home
Dysfunctional,
lives.
yeah.
And I was a lost soul because when you haven't got that family environment, that solid family environment, you look for that same connection in gangs. Boys do, mostly boys. They go out and they find gangs because they feel safe. It's like another family almost.
It's like they belong and you become a product of your own environment. It's very difficult to get out of that when everyone's doing the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I felt good in the gang, even though we were little tearaways and getting into all kinds of trouble. I felt good in that. And I've always had a lot of drive and a lot of energy, and I was kind of good at being bad when I was in that. But one thing that took me out of that was that one day one guy came up to me and he said, "Look," he said, "I've heard you guys are starting a band." And the only reason we couldn't start a band because each one of the lads in the group were getting put away, and they were going away for stretches, and so we could never actually get the band together. But this other kid had heard about it. He said, "Do you want to join my band?" And he was quite well, he was a very good singer and he was a good guitarist, and he taught me how to play the bass. And to cut a long story short, I just found something really positive that I put all my energy into, and it
Yeah.
took me off the streets. It got me away from the gangs, and I focused on that. And within like about 3 years later, we'd actually won like a national pop competition, mainly on the strength of the singer. He had a great voice. He was the main talent, but I was with him and I was helping him.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
it was like the X Factor of its day. I mean, in 1983, we won £10,000 and we were on telly, and we had all the biggest record companies chasing us. And so suddenly, from this crazy failure upbringing where I kicked out of school, I was getting all this kudos, for being in the band, and it came really quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but even then, I put I didn't give myself any credit for my part. I just felt such a failure at that time. I felt it was just because the singer had a good voice, And so it was something that low self-esteem, that lack of belief came from my programming in my childhood.
Yeah.
And even though I was having success, a touch of success, I couldn't enjoy it because I didn't believe that I deserved it. And it was years later. So the band we never made it. We were doing the too many drugs and doing too many crazy things to be focused on, building a career in the music business. So it kind of came and went like Halley's Comet. But I knew I didn't want to sit in an office. I wasn't cut out for that kind of thing. So I kind of hustled my way through my 20s. I was driving a mini cab at nights in the West End. I
Yeah.
was playing guitar in bars and clubs just to, make a living.
Mm.
And it was one time in a bar that we shared the bill with the stage hypnotist, and he was manipulating the audience and getting people up and getting them to do crazy things. And I had this epiphany that, I saw the power of hypnosis in that moment, and I wanted to learn everything I could about it. And
Wow.
I didn't want to do the entertainment thing.
No.
I knew there was something there that I could heal a lot of my own wounds and my dysfunction, because I was still racked with, low self-esteem and lack of belief. And, I always thought bad things were going to happen to me. And sure enough, because I was
Yeah.
projecting that out, they often did. And it was
Mm.
almost like I was wading through treacle day after day. I used to wake up with this heaviness. But once I'd, started to, because after that, I signed up for a 2-year diploma with the British School of Clinical Hypnosis. And, even that was, for me, that was a big thing to do because my association with sitting in a classroom and learning was so bad because I'd been kicked out of school
Yeah.
that I found it really difficult just to sit in a classroom. And I was like, about 30 at that point.
Mm.
And, but
Because it
because
reminded you of being back at school and your childhood and
the association, yeah.
the association.
But I knew by then, I kind of figured out that that was just a wound that I was operating from. And these new skills that I was learning in the course, I could use them to clear that wound and to enjoy it, to feel good about sitting in the classroom, taking in information, studying, enjoying it.
Yeah.
And I did that. So as I was learning about hypnotherapy and how to use the techniques, I was really starting to work on myself.
Mm.
And I realized at that point that I could, change my life from the inside out. I didn't
Mm.
have to buy into that thing that, I was a failure. I was never going to make anything of myself. And so I used to, use hypnosis every day, self hypnosis. And I'd have a list of goals, things that I wanted to achieve, and I'd write
Yeah.
them down. I had them, by my bedside, on the bathroom mirror. And every day I was, repeating these affirmations and things that I wanted to achieve. And I used to use self hypnosis for an hour every day. And my wife at the time, she said to me that I used to get so deep into it, she would actually feel the bed vibrating because I'd go so deep into a state of self hypnosis and projection that she'd feel that energy vibration. And I believed it. I started to believe that there was a way out of the struggles and the difficulties and
Yeah.
the wounds and traumas. I knew that I could release them because I was learning this in the classroom.
Yeah.
And then I got into the law of attraction as well.
Yeah.
And, and I, immersed myself in that. I used to go to the library and I'd get as many books as I can on the subject.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I think I had this spiritual awakening because that kind of came in as well. I started to believe in a higher power for the first time. And I started to believe that, we are souls on this journey and we've come in with a personal quest, a soul contract.
Yeah.
And I knew that up to that point, I hadn't been living my soul contract, but I saw a way that I could change direction and start to really live that soul contract. And I changed so much.
Do you feel that you had to go through what you went through that as part of your soul contract? Because we learn through pain, unfortunately,
Yeah.
how we
Yeah.
change and grow and evolve through pain. Do you think that was always part of your soul contract to get you on this path?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a big thing for me because, out of adversity, sometimes the biggest lessons come. And it was certainly the case for me. That's a really good point because you kind of hit so many rock bottoms and you get so sick of it and you think there must be more to life than this.
Yeah.
There has to be. And I kind of knew there was because I could see other people, that were living a different kind of life. I didn't always know
Yeah.
them well, but I could see there were, ways out of it. And I think when I discovered hypnotherapy, meditation, the law of attraction,
Yeah.
that was the way I knew that I could transform my inner state
Yeah.
and the external world would respond to that, because everything is energy.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so yeah, it was incredible how it kind of I turned a corner at that time, and I was because I'd had so much struggle in my younger life. I was desperate. I had that fire in my belly.
Yeah.
I really
Wanted
wanted.
change. You
I
wanted your life
wanted.
to change.
And I think for anyone struggling, that's the thing you have to find. You have to really get that desire to transform your life and get out of any difficulty, any situation you're in. You've
Yeah.
got to really want that, and it can, it didn't happen for me overnight. It took time. It's almost like you're turning the tide. If
Yeah.
you've got a lot of negative programming and failure programming, it takes a lot of work. And I still work on myself now. I'm still, you know, my life now is a million miles away from where it once was. I've got a
Yeah.
beautiful family. I'm living on the Algarve. I feel I've got a career that I absolutely love. I feel so blessed. I wake up in the morning and do the first thing I do is a gratitude offering. I project that out there. I feel
Yeah.
so thankful that, when I was 30, I managed to turn a corner.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed because I know not everyone has that opportunity and they can't always do it. But I love helping other people to do that. And, my recordings ever since have been all about that. I've
Yeah.
really, everything I've learned, I've infused my recordings with that
So
energy.
so when you just to backtrack, so when you were really focusing on the self hypnosis and changing your inner state, your inner world, what happened? How long did it take for your outer world to reflect the inner changes? Like how did you get onto the path of
Mm.
being a hypnotherapist?
It took a bit of time. It was because I was still racked with a lot of self-doubt at that time.
Right.
And so, even kind of when good things started happening, and I thought, oh, this will never last, or,
Right. Yeah.
being suspicious of people's motives if they were nice or whatever, all of that kind of stuff. But I kind of had recognized at that point that these were just old wounds. So when these things started to come up, I'd work on those individual things.
So you're
And I
very
still
self-aware.
self-awareness, yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
important thing. And I still do that now. So, because we're all a work in progress.
Mm.
I'm not at the end destination. I'm just in a good place and I want to get further. I want to continue to raise my vibrational energy
Yeah.
and to continue to experience abundance in this life and more love.
Hmm.
And so I'll be doing this work in my 90s and beyond because, it's such an amazing journey, an incredible journey. And so I think, yeah, it took me a while I think the hardest thing was turning the corner and really believing that you can transform your life. You can
Yeah.
get out of any situation. But as any self-doubt or as any wound would come up or I was triggered by a situation or a person, instead of getting angry and going back at that person, I'd look at that from a higher perspective. I think,
Yeah.
what is that triggering in me? Where does that come from? And always the trigger would be a wound that was unresolved within me.
Into. Yeah. That's
So I was
always
able to
the case.
work on that. And sometimes I worked with other therapists. I'd swap therapists and, because there was only so much I could do on my own. So I
Yeah.
do that. And I've never stopped on that path of, self-awareness and healing and, trying to move forward and, yeah, just growing as much as I possibly can in this lifetime.
That's incredible. I love your story of transformation as well, because it is the polarities of where you were at
Yeah.
compared to now, and you've had a really successful career and continue to have a successful career. So,
Yeah.
so were you because I remember we when we last did our interviews a few years ago now,
Mm.
but you said that you was it Balham, just because I lived in Balham at one stage, was it you used to go around, you used to have your recordings and you used to drop them at, I think it was was it pharmacies? Am I,
Yes.
correct me if
So
I'm wrong.
no,
And
no, you're right.
yeah,
I was born in Balham, lived
yeah,
there till about six. Then we moved out to the suburbs to Orpington, and I went to school in Bromley. But when I became a hypnotherapist after I'd done the 2-year diploma, I was kind of like where Lee is. I know you interviewed my son Lee, who's doing amazing work as a hypnotherapist. He's
I
kind of
know.
where I was at 25 years ago, and
I know. I feel like I should be doing a series like Keeping Up with the Harolds or something.
have to get Nicola on next.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah.
So with so yeah, I was kind of where Lee is now. So I was seeing lots of clients, up to 30 clients some
Yeah.
weeks, immersing myself in it. It was, but because I'd been a musician in my past and I knew a little bit about recording, I one day had this light bulb moment that I thought, maybe I could record a couple of sessions to give to my clients, to support the work I'm doing with them one to one. So one day I went into my studio and I recorded, put a little bit of reverb on my voice, and then went straight onto a DAT machine and listened back to it. And I thought, oh, that sounds quite good. And then I thought, maybe I could because I was working above a chemist chain in a chemist store in Maidstone in Kent. That was one of the clinics I was working from. And so I went into the shop and I said, look, would you mind if I put a couple of my tapes in here? They were cassettes. So I'd run them off onto cassette, make
Yeah.
homemade covers, and then I'd deliver them into a few local chemists. And they said, no, that's okay. And I'd go back in a couple of weeks' time and a few of them had sold, for like £7 or whatever it was at the time. And I remember thinking, wow, that's amazing. And the ladies would say, well, this gentleman came in and he said, you're helping him sleep. He's sleeping much better since.
Oh,
So I thought, wow, if I can do that locally, then why couldn't I do it everywhere? There must
yeah.
be a demand. It seems like there's a demand for it. And so from there, I went to the bank and I borrowed £1,000 to get some nice display stands made and to run off the cassettes commercially and, make it a little bit more professional. And it just took off because I got them into a load of the rest of the chemist chain. I phoned up the boss and I convinced him to allow me to put them into the whole of the chain, and they started really selling well. So
Amazing.
much so that within about 3 years, I was turning over like 500,000 back then and employing like 5 people.
Yeah.
And my PA at the time, or Marie, actually, she's still with me. She said to me, what's this 36 quid coming out the account every month? I said,
Yeah.
oh, that's £1,000 loan I borrowed off of Barclays to get the display stands. So again, it was right place, right time. And the whole thing, the
Yeah.
abundance thing just took off. But I was meditating. One of my big affirmations back then was that I'm always in the right place at the right time. Abundance comes freely and naturally to me. All of my needs are constantly met. And I would do that affirmation over and over in
Wow.
meditation, but also as a mantra when I was driving. I turn the radio off in the car, and so I kind of just immersed myself in this abundance work, and within a short period of time, that also happened. I was selling a huge amount of
Yeah.
recordings. I had a knock on the door from the BBC. They said, we want to buy all your recordings because they were the biggest audiobook producer in the UK. And I was actually showing up. There was a chart in the UK, the audiobook chart, and it was like J.K. Rowling was number one. All
Yeah.
these household names were in the top 10, and I was like in number five. And so
Amazing.
the big publishers are thinking, who is this bloke? Where's he come from?
That's
And
yeah.
and so I started getting, offered big deals, from the BBC and publishing deals that were just, so the whole success thing just built and grew.
Yeah.
And and it was quite amazing, that journey, to go from that borrowing that £1,000 to like, just taking off in that way. And
And
yeah.
what I else I find so incredible is the fact, two things actually. First of
Mm,
all, your band days,
mm.
utilizing all of those skills in the band, but for your recordings, for
Yeah,
helping
yeah,
people overcome limiting beliefs, sleep, anything like that for hypnosis.
yeah,
And also the fact that you were doing the law of attraction, you were really, because we talk about the law of attraction and I don't, like some of the new age stuff is like, oh, I've read The Secret and that's it. But it's,
mm,
there is a method to it. You have to think it, believe it, but also put it into practice as well, which
yeah,
you're doing. And I feel your intention was so strong. It was almost like a quantum leap, quantum jump that you'd done through your meditation and law of attraction, which is really
yeah.
incredible.
I think the one thing, The Secret was an amazing film because it woke a lot of people up to the that age-old knowledge that the law of attraction is a real thing. It's an
Yeah.
energetic force that you can tune into. But I feel the one thing that was missing from that was that you've got to also do the inner work and clear any failure programming,
Yeah.
because without me doing that clearing work and clearing those failure programs that were running around, because I found at first I was taking 3 steps forward, or 2 steps forward and 3 steps back.
Right.
So I was using the law of attraction, but I was still tripping up and things were happening and things were not flowing as like I thought they should do.
Okay.
And I realized it was because I needed to clear things within me that were sabotaging opportunities. So I
Uh,
think that's the one ingredient that is often missing from the law of attraction, workshops and books and what have you. you need to be doing those two things because, the projections are really important. But, if you're unconsciously pulling yourself back, or, you've got a program running that says, only success happens to other people, or,
Mm,
money's hard to come by, which a lot of people have those kind of beliefs, you're
yeah,
going to sabotage opportunities unconsciously. So
yeah.
it's really good to, clear those things first so that your projections are much clearer and have
Mhm.
much more power without tripping up.
Yeah.
So I recognize that. And that was a big part of my work and always has been.
Glenn, what would you say would be your advice to anyone that's kind of trapped in a lower vibration? They don't know how to get out of it. Maybe they're kind of doing the same thing over and over again, but they don't see like what else is there to do, but they're not feeling fulfilled inside, but they want to change. They just don't know what else there is. What advice would you give?
You have to treat it holistically. So you have to look at mind, body, spirit. And one of the things I did when I was, made that decision that I was going to change direction, I massively cut down drinking. That was a
Yeah.
big one. Booze just lowers your vibrational energy. I'd quit smoking before that. I started to eat much more healthily. And at that time, it was soon after that that I became a vegetarian because
Right.
I became very aware of the cruelty in factory farming,
Yeah.
and it was so. When I looked at it, it was so abhorrent to me that I could not, and I've never since that time 30 years ago. I've never eaten fish, chicken, meat. I've just been vegetarian, and for majority of that, vegan.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that was a big thing. I really. So I worked on my fitness as well. I started to play tennis back then.
Yeah.
I wanted to, because I always loved sport when I was a kid, but I just got waylaid, being in a band took me in a different direction. So I got back into
Yeah.
sport. Started to play tennis.
Yeah.
And so I started to get fitter, to get healthier.
Mm,
And
yeah.
and I was meditating all the time. I was started to list my goals. I
Yeah.
started to read a lot of books, by people who were successful and also very spiritual authors that inspired me.
Yeah.
Back then in the sort of when was it, like early 90s, it would have been like Stuart Wilde, Eckhart Tolle. I think his book came a bit after.
Yeah.
Louise Hay, and I started to really get inspired by these books and
Mm,
also go to groups. I was going to meditation groups uh,
right.
and spiritual healing groups. So I kind of, threw everything at it and
Yeah.
did lots of different things and started to hang out with more positive people, people who are awake and consciousness and going on the same path.
I think that's a big part of it as well, to surround yourself with like-minded people and have a community, because you, like we said before, you become a product of your own environment. So I think that's really important, like how you went to the meditation groups, found like-minded people, because you can accelerate that path a lot quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're, with other people who are on that path, that's kind of all you want to talk about because it's like
Yeah.
you've got this knowledge and awareness that a lot of people haven't got. And so you're in this unique little club where you can talk about these things and
Yeah.
people won't look at you like you're a nutcase.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the things I did back then, I myself and my wife, we joined the Kent Healers group. And
Uh,
and I was in my early 30s then, and we'd go to this little group in Tunbridge Wells, and it was an old lady. She was in her sort of late 60s, and we go to her house, and they were the Kent Healers, and we used to sit in this little group, and we do hands-on healing with each other.
yeah.
And even then, at times, I think, what am I doing in this room with all these old people putting my hands around their aura, thinking something's happening? But then, that was an old belief. That was an old, it came from an old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I knew I was onto something different that none of my family had ever gone to. And I kept with it. And I
Yeah.
always remember there was a guy there, a guy called Peter, who sadly passed away a few years later. He got cancer and he died. But he sort of ran this little group and he'd focus on me at sometimes and he'd say, Glenn, I want you to do the little meditation at the end. It was only like 5 minutes, so just a gentle, deep breathing and relax. And even though it was a very simple little thing to do, and it was, you know, a group of older people, I
Yeah.
felt, I thought, oh, please don't ask me to do that. Don't, you know, I don't want to. I felt
Why?
so shy. I still had this shyness and this lack of
Ah,
belief. And but he'd focus and he'd say, look, he said, and he was psychic, and he used to say to me, I'm getting this message for you that you need to be using your voice. You need to be projecting out from your throat chakra.
yeah.
And when I think, you know, I ended up selling 10 million meditation recordings, and this was before that happened. He knew, he knew that was my,
Wow.
and so
That's
things like
incredible. Yeah.
amazing things like that would happen. I'd meet people
Yeah.
who are on the, and they'd say, look, you're on the right path. Keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so many things like that happened back then. I felt so lucky, but it was just an affirmation from the universe that you're on the right path now.
Yeah.
And so like kind of he'd forced me to do this, and I do them, and then afterwards I think, oh, that was all right. I enjoyed that. What am I
Yeah.
frightened? You know,
So it
and then
built
I
up
so I
your
learned.
confidence, and it got rid of those limiting beliefs from your
Yeah,
childhood. I remember you were telling me last time we spoke as well, from your band days when you were, was it Top of the Pops or something that you were on, or a TV show, and
we we did.
you couldn't speak or something?
No,
Like,
there's a clip of me on YouTube when I'm like 19 talking on a kids TV show in,
ah,
in 1983, and in that I'm sort of mumbling. Yeah, we smoked a couple of joints before we went on, so we weren't that sort of literate
yeah,
anyway. You know, I don't know
yeah,
what we were thinking, and I just mumbled a little bit. But I hated speaking. You know, if ever we did interviews as a band, I always used to, you know, get out the back and I'd let the rest of the band talk, and they'd take the mickey out of me for, you know, because I'd just say hello and goodbye, and I was just completely blocked. And you know, I think all the work I've ever done since then has just cleared all that failure programming has gone, and I love it. You know, I can talk anywhere now. I've, you know, been on, you know, big TV shows and radio shows in the UK, and I'm happy talking. I love it. You know, it's
yeah,
because, you know, I just feel free. I feel liberated. You know, and it's just so nice to have, you know, gone through that, but found a way out of it. You know,
yeah.
knowing that I didn't have to stay stuck in that. But I think a lot of people don't realize that you can break out of those old wounds and those things that keep you
Mm,
trapped. Anyone can.
yeah.
This is the gift of life. You know, we have that free will.
So for a first step, you'd say get around like-minded people, improve your physical health,
Yeah,
meditation, hypnosis,
yeah, yeah.
all of those kind
And
of things.
yeah, read books, you know, that inspire you and teach you things. You know, knowledge is power, and
Mm,
you know, there's a lot of free material out there on the internet. You know, Eckhart Tolle is a great guy to listen to. If ever you're feeling stressed and wound up, just put on one of Eckhart's videos on YouTube.
yeah,
He's this little German fella that's very unfashionable. He wears, you know, a little suit, and you know, he's not particularly cool to look at, but he's got so much wisdom and knowledge.
yeah.
And when he speaks, I've seen him live a number of times, and I actually met him out in Malibu because we were with the same app developer, and we sat and chatted for like half an hour and talked because he slept on the bench on a park bench in Regent's Park. And
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, he
Yeah.
went to college. He was a very bright student. He was in college with Stephen Hawking, and he was telling me this when we were chatting. He said that he was, you know, but he was so disillusioned with life, and you know,
Mm,
his studies were very academic, and he knew there was more to it. And
yeah,
somehow he ended up, you know, homeless for a little while. He was sleeping on a park bench in Regent's Park, and he said that he suddenly started to really tune into the moment and become very present, and to be observing, you know, everyday things, you know, like a bird flying into the tree or the rustle of the bushes and people walking by.
yeah.
And
The
he
power of
said that
now. Yeah.
he said, well, the concept for his book came from that moment when he was on the park bench. He said
Oh,
the initial idea came from there, and he
yeah.
went on to write the biggest self-help book in the world that sold, you know, God knows how many copies, tens of millions,
Wow.
and it came from that moment. And you know, so yeah, we talked about that, and you know, and he's a really, I found him all through COVID. He's been a really authentic teacher. It's a
Yeah.
real insight. So yeah, he's a great person to follow. I think you've just got to really immerse yourself in this and believe that you can transform your life. It doesn't matter how tough your childhood was, what you went through, you can break out of that and you can make a difference. You know, you can do something in this life where you're fulfilling your soul contract and living a life of purpose, living an abundant life.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'll just give you a little example of my son Lee, because
Yeah.
he didn't have the struggles I had, because his life was, you know, myself and, you know, his mom were very supportive and nurturing of him. You know, and but he got to a point where he grew up in Essex and he was hanging around with lads that were, you know, typical, you know, sort of Essex wide boys. He'd be out in
Yeah.
nightclubs. He was always in nightclubs, you know, designer gear, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, they were great lads. They're funny as they come. And, you know, I actually went to Mallorca, to Marbella with them a couple of times, and it was the
Oh,
maddest time.
nice. Bet you had fun.
Yeah, crazy times. But Lee suddenly broke out of that. And he said they'd all be going off to a nightclub and he'd bump into a homeless guy and he'd take him for a meal. And he'd say to the other, like, look, you go, I want to just give this guy a meal. And and he phoned me up and he said, oh, I'm sitting with this homeless guy. I'm just bought him dinner. And he kind of completely changed direction of his own accord. He had this awakening. And then he
Yeah.
found the Christian movement, and that really propelled him along that path. And he stopped worrying about wearing fancy designer gear and having a flash car, all that stuff. It just went. His
Yeah.
priority became about, you know, became about healing and
Mm.
being of service to other people,
Yeah.
and doing good things and being more compassionate, more loving. And that's a part of it as well, because when you do that, you know, you emit a different kind of energy, and people pick up on that. They feel it.
And feeling fulfilled from the inside as well, not just external things. We can get all the designer, like the house, the car, the job,
Yeah.
whatever, and people are just empty inside. So it's actually feeling fulfilled. Your soul
Yeah, that's a
feeling
really good
fulfilled.
point. The material can never fulfill you because it's endless. You know, if you're just focused on that, it doesn't matter how big your house is or how big your car is. There's
Yeah.
always going to be someone who has something better. And it's just this treadmill that people get caught on.
We're kind of taught to be encroached within this system. It's very hard
Yeah,
to break out of it with the corporate world and
materialism.
the monetary system, everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's all geared up to keep people, you know, trapped in that and
Yeah,
acquiring more, you know, and,
yeah,
you know, it's, you know, so that's liberating because, you know, you know, when I started to do well and experience abundance, I enjoyed it so much more because I had that knowledge, you know, the giving and receiving aspect, you
yeah,
know, not just about acquiring and, you know, and, you know, fulfilling your own needs. You know, I've been able to, you know, Lee's out here on the Algarve because I've helped him get out here. And
yeah.
it's such a blessing. You know, he says to me I love it out here so much. And, you know, and he thanks me, but he's now, you know, he's on his own momentum now. And so I got him out here, but he's blossoming and doing his own thing out here. And it's beautiful.
Oh yeah,
You know, I kind of knew, you know, when I was living in the UK, I felt for a long time that I'd kind of outgrown it. You know, the energy
yeah,
of the UK was kind of changing, and we talked about it getting more dense. And, you know, every time I went away, I never wanted to go back. And I
yeah,
spent, I spent some time at a shamanic retreat, in Panama a number of years ago with my wife, Nicola. And when we were there, the shaman said that he said something that really stuck with me, that it's so important to live somewhere where you feel resonant with the land. You feel in tune with it.
yeah,
For you to
yeah,
truly thrive and, you know, to feel abundant, you've got to feel a resonance with where you live. And
yeah.
that really hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, I've got to find a place where I feel at peace, and you know, wake up in the morning with, you know, good energy, because I knew that it wasn't the UK. and
No,
and it takes a lot, you know, to make the changes, you know, because I had a business in the UK. I had, you know, obviously family and, you know, a lot going on there. So to make that change, it takes a lot, you know, but I was so determined. And fortunately,
yeah.
my wife Nicola, she felt the same. And eventually, you know, we made it. We made the journey. When
And
our little baby was one as well.
that's
Eden was one
really
at the time.
brave. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah,
amazing. It's a big change, but one that you feel, the environment really resonates with you. So yeah,
yeah.
good on you for being brave.